Welcome to Getting to the Truth in His Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thanks for listening. My next guest is a multi-disciplinary artist and cultural worker of Jamaican heritage. Extended beyond monolithic perspectives, she is committed to uplifting stories of Black identity as a means to explore international connections among the Pan-African and Caribbean diasporas. Please welcome Lehna Huie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. And this is definitely a vibe of like inside baseball a little bit. Is, you know, like background communications and networking. So yeah, this is definitely a treat for me to have this come together.
Absolutely. Such a joy.
So for the fine folks who are undipped, uninitiated, give us those vital stats, your background. I fumbled through your background, but describe your background and really what currently inspires your work.
Yeah, so my background, I'm from New York City. I was born and raised there. And I am from Jamaica. So both my parents are from there. I'm the first generation born in the US, but I did spend a lot of time there as a child. And my childhood was surrounded by art. So that's always been at the center. So I'm a third generation artist, and my father was a graphic designer. My grandfather is known as the father of Jamaican painting. He is a painter. My mother, and I was raised by my mother and aunt who put us through school by making jewelry, so that our home was surrounded by art, Black art, that was representative, reflective of our culture. So landscapes, celebrating our skin, our features, and where we come from.
Yeah, that's what we need. And I think that's a thing that I'm glad that ultimately Thomas kind of brought us together, or what have you, and you were at the Repercussions show and that art talk where, again, I tried to act like I belonged in the room. And it's great to have that celebration and acknowledgement of all cultures, but more focused and more pointedly on Black culture. Yo, that looks like me in that picture right there. That painting, I know that we had those. And I think is really important to have that represented, because even if we're having a conversation, you can sit down with a panel of Black artists and let's talk about this, but it's still not enough. It's still moving in that direction, but it's still not enough. So being able to have this conversation is going to be great.
Absolutely. For sure.
Let's talk about your artistic style a little bit. Describe your style for somebody who knows absolutely nothing about art, and what artistic movements or artists have influenced you.
So my style is what I like to call a bit of a remix, because it's a little bit of everything. So I have a painting background, but, I've expanded that over the years to include using multiple mediums and multiple formats to express my work. And so my style is a combination of my heritage. So it's definitely very colorful and influenced by the colors that you'll find in the Caribbean and Africa, which is of the diaspora, where, my family is very Afrocentric. So everything in our home over the years has always been very colorful patterns that are from Africa.
Yeah.
And so there's that. Also, the style is also, I would say, a reflection of New York. So it's very gritty. There's a lot of layers, and it's really kind of rough to the exterior. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of, just grit about it that is a little bit of a mixture. So it's almost like a soup or a roux of things that combines the cultures that I'm very much influenced by. So I spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, also in New Orleans and Detroit, and thinking about those cities that really influenced me, and really emulate so many of those connections across the globe. And so, yeah, my work is definitely reflective of that jazz and reggae, hip hop, all of those things really influence my work. And so you'll see all of that, those musical influences in there, as well as ancestral influences, spiritual references as well.
I like that, where it's at least from my standpoint, the color comes in. It's like, oh, this is welcoming and inviting, haha. And it's like, no, here's the realism around it, though. Like, yeah, you can see the color, but here's that realism, that grittiness you described. And it's like, yeah, this is what's here. And it's like, it's going to have different objects that are in there, but people are attracted by this one thing, but that maybe the color or what have you, or how the color is displayed. It's like, oh, that's something that's really catching my eye. And then when you get to that granularity of it, it's like, oh, this is what's happening here.
And, I use a lot of different material in my work. So it ranges anywhere from, like your traditional painting to a very non-traditional painting. So my style is like, yeah, like I can incorporate a lot of collage into my works and mixed media, found objects, and also objects that are sacred to me and my family that I use in the work. So you'll see a lot of that in there. I use my family archive. So a lot of photographs, and many of the photographs have a vintage look and feel to them because they're from that time, a time in the past. And I tend to use those images a lot to connect the past to the present and the future. Yeah. So my work is a lot about time travel and time, just being this malleable, flexible thing that is translated through the images in many different ways. So sometimes there'll be these strips of fabric, or sometimes it's, this sawdust or soil mixed in with the paint.
Yeah.
And so it creates this very sculptural elements.
So tell me about a piece of your work that holds particular fond memories for you, and maybe why, or what's that connection there?
Fond memories. Well, I guess I could speak about the more recent one, the one that you know of, which is the water spirit piece that was at the UB Blake show. That one, it brings back a lot of fond memories because it was the piece that I was working on when the pandemic first hit. And it was around the time when I first started really doing more installation-based work. And so I consider my installations to be like these shrine spaces or altar spaces. So installation might be the technical term, but it's really more of like a ritual space. And so, I was really digging into a lot of that kind of work when I started that piece, and was really thinking about how I was gathering all of these pieces and elements and, created these strips of fabric, and they were from murals that I had painted years ago with students that I worked with that I loved. And so there were all the remnants of those memories with them of building scaffolding together and, making these amazing giant paintings together. And so they had those memories in them, with also carrying the stories within those murals, and then bringing it into this larger conversation about Black history. So making those connections across generations. And so I created this, it's almost like a canopy piece. And it was, when I was studying at MICA, I started it there, and then the pandemic hit. So it was the piece that I was working on as that happened. And so that completely grounded the context in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. because of all of the things that were happening in terms of like the uprisings that were occurring at that time, as well as like all the medical apartheid. And medical apartheid is a subject that I do tap into a lot in my work because I have a background also as a doula. So like I've done a lot of work around like reproductive justice and like supporting families. And I'm also a mother. And so those things are really important to me. And my family are like, we have a large history of medical workers in my family, but also roots workers. So people who use roots medicine to heal. And so like we have that awareness of that, with that awareness of medical apartheid is a huge factor of that piece. It also connects to the history of how, you know, of how Africans were enslaved and brought to and scattered across the globe. And so that piece is really both honoring the, like those who were lost in that space and what they had to endure, but it also is celebrating those who also like had faith, kept the faith, and also celebrating our deities and our, like the people, our higher powers, higher creative powers that would guide us that guided us at that time and still guide us today. And so like honoring those deities, honoring those water deities that protected, you know, us then and as they do now. And so like honoring that, understanding that it's both a site. So the Atlantic and the Caribbean seas are both sites of pleasure and violence. And so like that, it's both, it's, you know, that those two experiences in one. And so that piece, this with the cascading waterfall kind of look to it is almost like a crying or weeping, but also like this movement of the water that represents safety, although the power of water could also take you under.
Yes.
So it's both of those things.
As an Aquarius, I definitely agree with it. And Hensley, like, what? No. I think it's great in going there. And that's definitely one of the, like going there and kind of doing the talk and having that walkthrough and kind of experiencing the different pieces, and yours absolutely was just like early in it. And that was just one that just naturally like, and this is no gas, by the way, but just naturally kind of caught my attention. So having that additional layer directly from the creator, the artist here, is like, okay, yeah, I got something extra special. So when someone's asking questions like, yeah, as the artist once said, I can act like I know something. See?
Yeah.
You're helping me create this fake background.
Oh no. And I wanted to also add to that really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
That so at the base of the piece, and it's, you know, I used very bright colors. I've added a lot of like kind of ribbons and string to emphasize that cascading water. But at the base of it are these window panes. And the window panes are from a space that I did an installation in at Mount Royal Mansion. Mm-hmm. So I was with my class. We all did these historical based research projects. And so I took and installations. And so I took the window panes from that space because in the section of my installation, I honored the enslaved children that lived in that mansion. When I did the research, I went to the Pratt Library. I did research on their lives, but didn't find anything about them other than the number of children that were there. And so each window pane represents one of the children that lived in that space that was unnamed. So it also connects them to all of the unnamed in the larger context of history, the unnamed, the great Blacks, you know, that were unnamed and still to this day go unnamed.
That continuation of like honoring, whether it be unnamed children, whether it be unnamed folks, whether it be just the deities that have helped us, just acknowledging and speaking to in existence in a very like true way, as opposed to just moving on to something else. And
yes.
that's absolutely important, because, you know, I think it's Black people, a lot of times we're not afforded the opportunity to always talk about our history, our beliefs, and what matters to us. And it's a richer history than just starting at colonialism and slavery and things of that sort. It goes deeper, and there's family history that obviously does not get touched on at all. So I think it's important for us, when we have that opportunity, those platforms, to really put it out there if that's something that speaks to us.
Absolutely.
So it's clear to me, obviously, that your work is very close to you, and like most creatives, right? And I think art has a checkered relationship with money and commercialization, especially with Black artists. It's like this thing where we want your art, but not necessarily you in it. If we can just have, like, you know, this speaks to somebody. Can you tell me about any opportunities that you've come across that you've just had to say like no to, like this just doesn't rock, I can't rock with this? And what kind of went into that decision to say no?
Yeah, I think that it's a skill that I've learned and I'm still learning over time, because, you know, it's like we have to survive, we have to live, we have to feed our families, right? And so sometimes we, like, regardless of whether we're artists or not, we'll have to make these negotiations that, you know, are not always what we want to do in order to put food on the table. And so I think that it's like a lot of what I've learned over time is that saying no to things that are not in alignment will actually bring you closer to what is in alignment. Mm-hmm. And so I just recall learning the hard way, doing things that I didn't want to do, mm-hmm. and end up dragging it out. And it really just was not helpful. And so I think, like, there were certain projects that I ended up, you know, like that once I realized that there were no boundaries around it, that I had to be the one to create those things. And while I'm I'm very generous and giving and of my time, and I love creating, I love working with others and collaborating. And so sometimes it can be difficult to want to participate in things. I mean, to participate in things without knowing where your limitation is.
Yeah.
Or without being able to speak to that limitation honestly to those that you're working with. And so that's something that I've learned and over time. And like, there are so many instances where I can remember, you know, having to eventually say no, because I just knew that it just wasn't in alignment. And I think sometimes it's something that you actually do want to do.
Yeah.
It's not about not wanting to do it. It's just knowing that you might be at capacity right now. Like, mm-hmm. Your focus might be, you know, on a whole other thing. And so really it's important to just be able to, like, know your patterns, learn your patterns, and understand that they change and shift over time.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just got to say no.
That's the thing that I had to come to the realization of, and especially even when it comes to this element of community. Like, you know, I'm operating of like two different sides of my mind, right? Like, I'll operate in this creative kind of don't say no to things and kind of operate and ride that wave. And then I'll operate with that kind of business strategic side of things, and how do these two things really work together? But sometimes they bump up against each other. So, for instance, I wouldn't want to bring someone on here from a strategic standpoint. It might make sense of, hey, they got followers. You know, this is probably an interesting person to talk to, and it'll put you in this space. But it's like, yeah, I can't really jam with this person. And I try to have these conversations as if, like, one, I got to be interested in what you're doing. Like I gotta have at least some cursory interest to make me even want to like delve into and learn more about, to come up with questions and, you know, really dive into that. And, you know, if you're not really feeling it, and I had this recently, and I try to be very mindful of, this is my creative expression. And, you know, going through it, some people don't consider this to be at the same level as theirs. So it's just like they'll half-ass it. They won't really put in that effort. And you have to recognize that sometimes. Like, where is this going? Is this person excited? Is this person interested? What are we doing here? Because you pick up an energy, you pick up a rhythm. It's like, absolutely, oh, you don't care about this. So it's like, I can't even try to joke with you. Like, it's some interviews I'll go back through and listen. It's like, did I try to joke with the person? Because if I didn't, I wasn't jamming with them. And that's the vibe. That's the vibe. And people will ask all the time, like, oh, like, do you know these people before you interview them? I was like, barely. And it's like, how do you get these good interviews? It's like, but I guess it's coming from like, hey, I'm interested. Energy. Yeah. So,
there's a mutual interest. There's shared values that are in alignment. I think it's fine to have difference, you know, to have a variety and diverse, you know, beliefs. I think that that's fine, but as long as there's a mutual respect and understanding, that's really, really vital.
Yeah.
And like you said, the energy, like if the energy feels off, it's off. Like you can't,
it's like, oh,
nothing's gonna really fix it.
I mean, I had that thing last week, and it's just like the person got on and they knew how to do my show. They told me everything on how I should do my show. And I was like, okay. And I'm just letting them go. We talked for 40 minutes. And I was like, yeah, I really know who you are now. It's like, I think I'm all set. So, and the person I learned hadn't listened to an episode yet. So and I'll just put it this way. They didn't look like you or I. So that was one dynamic there. And when I was just like, nah, I still think it just really fits what I'm looking for right now. Then a person was like, I realized I was a jerk and I kind of stepped all over you. And it's this long message about it. And I'm like, cool, you know, maybe this just doesn't fit right now. I'm a fighter. I'm natural. I'm a fighter. I'll figure out something and I'll get gold out of
something out in the future.
But it's kind of one of those things of like, this doesn't fit right now. And knowing how to say no and know how to be gracious and tactful when you're saying no. Because the commonality now, the way that people move now is, I'd rather ghost you and disappear. And that's not how we're adults.
I never understood that. I never understood the ghosting thing.
It's weird, especially from a creative standpoint. And I've had those things here, and it's like, hey, we should connect and collab on something, because they'll see a guest or somebody that they're like, wow, how'd you get that person? And then it's just like when it's time to really work together and do something, ghost. I just boo Casper. I don't know. So at times creators have a vision or an aspiration, and the finished product may be better, or I won't say worse, maybe better or different than what they expected. Can you see your product, your work as finished, as you're working on it? Like before you finish it, you can see what it would look like, and speak on that a little bit.
So my work is very much improvised. So improvisation is a huge part of how I express myself. And so even if a large part of it is gathering. Mm-hmm. So there's so many different stages to my work, and there's research, there's image gathering, material gathering, all these different stages. And I really, like, I've learned over time, I've learned my patterns over time because I didn't always understand them. Mm-hmm. And I realized, I've always done this. You know, this is just something that I've always done. So once I was able to begin to understand that like free flow is so central to my work, then I stopped having as much painful anxiety around why I couldn't be linear about these things. And so, there's a lot that just moves and flows. There's a lot that it just happens with spirit. Yeah. So it's like really an organic process. And so, like I always have a vision. but it's not, I know that the work itself is going to look different than that vision, but still somehow it seems to manifest to be a reflection of that vision still.
Totally.
And so, yeah, I think that, yeah, like definitely, I see the color, I see, you know, the image, some of the imagery, but sometimes, so my work happens in many iterations as well. So it might look this one way now, but in another version, you know, I could be using a projector. I could be using lighting in a different way. You know, like there might be a sound element. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like it has a lot of variety, but there's these multiple reflections of the same, multiple interpretations of the same imagery. Mm-hmm. And those interpretations are always improvised.
Yeah.
So it's just
no. When you mentioned the that connection to music, and as soon as you said improvise, I immediately started thinking about jazz, which you touched on with the New Orleans connection and all. And again, very, very Black, very ours, and even to a degree, well, big degree with like hip hop or what have you, you know, with freestyling or like live mixes and DJing and all of that stuff. It's like a lot of improvisation that goes on there, and maybe they're like I record this when I'm not doing it via Zoom, at a comedy club, and they focus on improvisation there. And it's just like, that's the thing. Like this podcast, I have the questions as a guide, right? But there's a fair amount of improvisation that goes on in this one. And there's a lot that goes on into the other podcasts that I do. So I definitely, when you said I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, sure. Remix and improvisation. Yeah, spin it.
And it's intuitive. I just go based on what spirit tells me, what calls me, something that draws me. Sometimes I'm walking past something and then I just see a pile of like broken objects that are speaking to me in some way. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to use that in the next piece. So I just pick them up. You know, like sometimes it's just walking in the park, and I use a lot of plant matter as well. So I'll just find some plants to work with for the day, and it's just becomes its own adventure. And I love that, like, I just love that element of adventure in the work. And the work typically takes a long time to make. I think because of my background in murals, like I did that for a living for a long time. I think that, you know, like I know how to fabricate work quickly and large scale, and can just kind of shoot things out very quickly. But in my personal work, takes time. Like I'll spend years on one body of work. And that's really, like, to be honest, they don't really end. Like each body of work is just kind of like a beginning. And then it's like this very long journey within each one. But it's almost like a library where you have like this kind of endless knowledge within each subject.
Yeah, it's I always look at some of these things, like, depending on the work, it's a living, breathing thing. And it's just like, oh yeah, I finished that. I was like, no, I got to keep putting it out there. I got to have another conversation with this person. Where are you at in a year? What are you doing? What's happening here? And I think when you get to a spot, at least I try to, without being egoic, I try to empathize in a way of, this is my thing, and like kind of maybe how it relates to somebody else's projects or someone else's work. And that living, breathing component is big, because I think when you were describing, I immediately thought of, I want to just take a finished puzzle sometimes and just throw it up in the air just to solve it as a problem and just like figure it out. I think I like to get my hands into things that way.
Yes.
So it might be, what's going on with the audio here? Or, wow, I haven't come up with questions yet. Let me research this person and come up with something that fits a standard, and knowing your patterns and getting an idea of like, do I even want to ask these questions? Should I postpone this? Is this going to be good? Is this a waste of time? Is this stupid? And, really kind of think of those things, and always like editing. So like, I was telling you before we got started, I put these rapid fire questions in there because I'm always going back through. It's like, I might write the questions or do that research. It's like, no, I need to get redipped. I'm doing this interview right now, and maybe this question doesn't work as well, or maybe I am in a more of an introspective mood, or maybe I'm on a, tell me more about your process kind of mood. And it's just a living, breathing thing. So when you're just stuck to this rigid setup, it doesn't work all the time, and you can't really have that exchange and that flow with people.
Right. Absolutely. I definitely agree with that for sure.
So this is the last question I have before we get to rapid fire ones. And this one is very self-serving, but I wanted to at least put it out there. Do you network with other artists? And within that network, how do you rely on those other artists? How do you support each other? Speak on that a bit.
I love artists. I love artist stories. I love learning about what artists do. And I love the variety of artists that I meet. Anything from musicians, poets, painters, sculptors, curators, like gardeners, farmers. Like, I love people. I love podcasters. And podcasters. Yes. I love people, writers, and I've always really connected with people from a variety, like a wide range within the arts, but also with organizers. So like people who are, passionate about justice. And so like a lot of that is artists, but it's not only artists. And so I find art, like what people might think of ordinary people, like I see art in that, and I see art in them. And so like, I'm really interested in people's stories in general, and learned so much from that. I find it very nourishing. And I find that I've always been a person who believes in like community. And so I think that I look at networking not as networking necessarily, but as connecting and as cultivating. So almost like a garden, like you're cultivating this garden, and you have all of these seasons. You have the 4 seasons, and you're right now, like you're going to plant your seeds. And then, in the next season, they'll come up or they won't. Some of them will, some of them won't. Then you harvest, and then like you got to go through the process all over again. And so I really look at connections and relationships like these lifelong gardens, like that you're constantly giving, feeding, you're nourishing throughout your life. And so the people that I've been able to connect with over time, I've grown with these artists. We grow together. Like my past classmates, past students that I've worked with on murals, past community members who came through for community paint days. I used to work with elder artists and interviewed them about like their lives and their experiences. And so like they would be going through decades and decades and decades of artwork that they hadn't seen in forever. And it would bring up these memories about how they used to organize with their artist friends back in the day. And that reminded me of my artist friends now. And it's like, wow, this is me in the future, like looking back and remembering all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so important to like I really treasure my friendships and relationships with people. And I find it so odd that that's not like a normal thing.
Right. I try to.
It took me a long time to realize that, like, oh, actually, people don't. This is not like a typical way of thinking. I think it's because of my family background. Like they are ministers, and they're activists, and abolitionists and artists. And so they always want to be with people, like always around.
Yeah.
And so like, I love deeply. I love to connect deeply. And I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your stories. I want to celebrate you. And so it was a very harsh reality for me when I like went into the world and realized like, this is not what people want, like, or this is not how people think. And so like, even to this day, it's so rare to really like make those really deep connections with people. And that's the most important thing to me, to build in those ways. Judgment is not a part of that game. Although, yeah, you have to have discernment because like we talked about when things aren't in alignment or when values are not like in the same area, then it's fine to walk away from things. But I really believe in building with people. Like I really strongly believe in that. And that's how our work grows. That's how we grow, you know? Like,
yeah. I mean, like where we met at the last resort or what have you, it was one of those things where I was like, yo, I remember talking to Thomas. I was like, do I fit here? I was like, these are real people. I'm someone else, you know, and it didn't kind of being there and then getting the vibe. I was like, oh, wow, this is what this looks like. This is an attempt to bring together and fill in some of those gaps with people who are like-minded and that community. And that's the key thing I got of it. And I'm glad that we were able to connect there because that was I literally floated out of there when I left because I'm really not in those environments as much, and it's all new to me. So having the privilege of being invited and coming and connecting with the folks that I did on that conversational and literally you're breaking bread with folks. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, yes. This is great. I'm in the room.
It's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'm going to wrap here on those real questions. Now I'm going to get to some rapid fire questions. And just for context, rapid fire, and I've been updating while we've been talking, but rapid fire questions are essentially, you just have to give the answer. Unless you want to provide extra context, you can, but you really got to, if you really want to. And with these, it's just like a peek inside who you are or what have you. All right. So the first question is music, podcast, or silence in the studio when you're working?
Ooh, that is tough.
I know.
Honestly, I want to say it's a combination of all three, but for the most part, I do listen to a lot of music while I'm working. Okay. But I will say that, yeah, I do a little bit of both too.
So you fell into the second part. You fell into the second part of this question because I knew it was going to be music. Favorite remix, since you described your work as a bit of a remix in some ways. What is your favorite remix? Because it's rumored that some people in New York may have invented the remix. So I want to get your take on what's your favorite remix out here.
Favorite remix? Wow, there's so many. I honestly love. God, I don't even know.
Oh, no.
No. So I'm thinking of it right now. Hold on. So, RZA's mixtape.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they like this mixtape with like these oldies. Like, it's not really remix, but like, I really just love mixtapes.
Yeah.
And, that one I really vibe with. Okay. It's like this Shaolin sample soul remix.
I'm here for it. I really
like that one.
I'm here for it. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie?
Yeah.
I really love The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. It's random, but I'm
not familiar with that one. Now you're just giving me something. You're giving me more homework to do. Favorite material to work with?
Favorite material? That's tough. I love working with everything. Like, I would say fabric, like fabric as canvas almost.
Again, I think I'm hitting you with all of the hard ones. I feel like I just left the hard ones here. Well, this is the last one I have for you, actually. Name an underappreciated area in Baltimore. Like just something to kind of like shout out like, yo, y'all should really check this place out. Like, I don't know what you're doing. Like, what's an unappreciated area in Baltimore from your perspective?
I'm going to say young Black women artists.
Okay.
I think that's what I want to focus on.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Or, yeah, artists, mainly women, because I feel like there's like a lot of focus on the male artists, but not as much celebration of young Black women artists. And I would like to see that more in connection with some of the community organizing that happens here, which is very strong. But I would like to see more overlap with that. At least the overlap that I always see and experience, I would like that to be celebrated wider, you know, than it is.
Well, you're off the hot seat now. So I want to invite you to tell the fine folks where to check you out, your social media website. And again, thank you so much for coming on to this podcast.
Thank you. I had a great time.
This has been great. So where's your social media website? All of that good stuff. Tell the fine folks. No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
Yes, I'm at Lehna Huie. It's LEHNAHUIE on Instagram. And my website is just my name, LehnaHuie.com. And yeah, you can always reach out to me, find me there. I'm around.
So there you have it, folks. I want to thank you again for coming on to the podcast. And for Lehna Huie, artist Lehna Huie, I am Rob Lee saying that there is art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.